Good morning, church. My name is Andrew Larson. I serve here at Canaan on our worship and tech teams, as I'm sure most of you actually know. Uh, our scripture reading this morning is from Hebrews 4, verses 14 through 16. Please stand if you are able for the reading of God's word. Hebrews 4, 14 through 16. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. This is the word of the Lord. You may be seated.
Two things. One, I think Andrew wins Bible Voice Reader of the Year. Second, if you have a Bible, open to Hebrews chapter 14. We're going to play a little jump, skip, and a hop between the end of 14 and chapter 5. Over the last couple weeks, I've been binging through what apparently is 8 Mission Impossible movies. I knew there were 4. I didn't realize there was 8. But that has been my movie of choice in my bike rides and in my wonderful treadmill runs in my basement because I needed something else. And sadly, I did not get through all of them until Netflix took them off. So I'm missing number 6. But I'm pretty sure the world's about to die and then Ethan Hunt's going to save it. And in 2 weeks of binge watching 7 of the, well, technically 6, because I missed number 6, 6 of the 8 movies, you realize it's the same song, different verse, but I'm still going to watch it, even though I know what's going to play out. At some point, Ethan Hunt is going to run really fast and kind of look kind of silly doing it. Without fail, there's going to be camera shots to make sure that Ethan Hunt doesn't look like he's 4'7", because in fact, Tom Cruise is one of the shortest people alive. There's going to be some explosions. There's going to be a love interest. And at some point, there's going to be a building or a situation that is impossible to access. And they're going to go, oh, no, it's impossible. And he's going to go, not for me. And you're going to be like, of course, because this is Mission Impossible and everything has to be impossible. But at some point, they're going to have to get into a place. They're going to have to access a room that is impossible to go to. In the first movie, it's the computer server with the 5-inch floppy disk that he's got to get the knock list off of. In movie number 3, he's got to do the little whole flying squirrel thing into the top of the building on Shanghai to get through the air duct. I think it was in movie number 5, he had to go down a drain hole and then go in this whirling vortex to pull a disc out to insert another one with an oxygen suit that read as oxygen because, you couldn't take metal into this. That would make it too easy to be Mission Impossible. And without fail, there's a situation that is impossible to overcome. There's a place that's impossible to access. And yet, because it's a movie in Hollywood, without fail, despite what the music wants to make you feel, he does. Every single time. Why did I tell you that? Because this morning, we're going to talk about how Jesus is the better high priest. Jesus is a better Aaron. And what we're going to find is that's important because the priesthood is intimately connected to access to God's presence. If you were a Jew, if you were a Hebrew raised up in the Old Testament times, and even to some extent today, there's a whole problem with not having a temple, but having access to God's presence, pursuing God's presence, was paramount to how you lived your life. And what you found very early on is if you were a common person, you didn't get access to the presence of God. Even if you were a priest, you're one of the holy members serving in the temple, helping people to know and love and worship God. You didn't get full access to the presence of God. There's only one person who would do it. And his title was that of high priest. And this morning, and then next week, we're going to kind of do part 1, part 2. We're going to see that Jesus is better than Aaron, who is the father of the priesthood. And then next week, we're going to see that Jesus is better than Melchizedek, who predates Aaron. And I'm going to show you some of my cards this week, but come back next week and we'll talk all about him. But this morning, we're going to talk about the priesthood and access to God's presence. And what we're going to find is Jesus is a better high priest who is drawn near to us so that we might draw near to God. That's the whole point of Hebrews chapter 4 in the beginning of chapter 5. That Jesus is a better high priest because he is drawn near to us so that we can draw near to him. So 3 points. First, Jesus is a better high priest, which leads me to a couple questions. 1, what exactly is a high priest? And 2, why is Jesus better than the rest of them? What's a high priest? Well, the high priest is the highest religious office that a person could hold in the nation and people of Israel. So there was regular priests, and then there was the high priest. He was over them and above them, like how there's managers, and then there's the senior manager, and then there's the owner, and then the president of the company. The high priest was higher than the regular priest. And the high priest had two requirements. You couldn't just apply for the job. Two things had to be true for you to be considered to be chosen to be the high priest. One was hereditary, and one had to do with holiness. You had to have the right lineage to be considered to become the high priest. You had to be of the line of Aaron. Aaron was Moses' brother. We spent all last year walking through the life of Moses, and Aaron was a key part of that. He had some really great moments. He had some really poor moments. But to be considered, to be chosen by God to be the high priest, you had to be a son, grandson, great son, grandson, so on and so forth of Aaron. One was hereditary. The second requirement was holiness. To be the high priest, to be considered to be the high priest, you had to be holy physically and holy spiritually. Just like all of the sacrificial animals had to be holy without spot, without blemish, you couldn't offer a sacrificial lamb to God that had a broke leg from the womb. No, it couldn't have a spot on its side. It had to be perfectly white, had to be able to function properly as a lamb could. You had to bring your best without any defect or flaw. To be considered to be the high priest, you had to be whole physically. The high priest couldn't um, have any defect in their body or in their person. But second, they had to be whole spiritually. There was a call and level of holiness on not just the priesthood, but on the high priesthood to walk in holiness as God is holy, to walk according to the law as God has given the law, to love God with all he had and all he was, and to love his neighbor as himself higher and more and to a higher standard than any other Israelite. It's kind of similar how we tend to think about pastors. First of all, pastors are people and pastors are sinners. Uh, that was Kevin, by the way, that said, yes, pastors are sinners. But there is a degree. First Timothy and in Titus, the qualifications to be a pastor, to be an elder, are laid out. And the first time you read those, you're like, "Whoa! I don't know if I want to live up to that." There's a standard that's expected, and the same is true for the high priest. They had to have the right lineage, and they had to have a particular standard of holiness to be considered to be chosen to be the high priest. That was their requirements. Second, the high priest also had particular functions. They did certain things. The high priest oversaw the other priest. The high priest helped the Israelite people discern the will of God through the Urim and the Thummim. If you've ever read those random words, it's not Urim and Thummim. That's an Im. There's a Hebrew lesson for the day. There were these little dice that they would roll. They would ask God to give them a decision, an A or B, and they would roll these dice, and they would trust the sovereignty and the will of God to roll the right way. That's not a carte blanche reason to go gambling. Third, the high priest offered sin offerings for the whole congregation. Day and night, the high priest would oversee the offerings to God from God's people for God to forgive their sins. And then, most importantly, the high priest performed the ceremony on the Day of Atonement that you find in Leviticus chapter 16. One day a year, one ceremony a year, the high priest would oversee the cleansing of God's people, the forgiveness of their sins, and then see their sins taken away through the Azazel, the goat that would go outside of the camp to go and die in the wilderness, just like Jesus went outside of the city to go and die in the wilderness for the sins of the people to take them away. The high priest would oversee that every single year, which was the single most important sacrificial ceremony for the people of God. And most importantly, on that most important day, the high priest would not only conduct the service on the 10th day of the 7th month of every year, which will be in September this year, but only the high priest after that, forgiving the sins of the people, doing his own ritual cleansing, offering a sacrifice for himself, he would then get to go into what is called the Holy of Holies. He would get to go into the furthest part of the temple or the tabernacle at the right time. And he would offer a sacrifice for himself, and then he'd offer a sacrifice for people. He'd take blood from the sacrifice, and he would drip 7 drops of blood onto the Ark of the Covenant, where the 2 tablets of Moses would go, where they believed the presence of God was dwelling, because that's where God said he would dwell. And one day a year, one man a year, for one moment on one day, this singular person would get to enter the presence of God, having slaughtered an animal for his sins, for the sins of the people. And he would get to walk into the presence of God and stand there for a few moments. And according to Jewish tradition, they would tie a rope around his leg with a bell. Because if he did any part of his ceremony or ritual wrong, if he sinned at any moment between his ritual cleansing and entering the presence of God, he would die. But no one else could go into the Holy of Holies, and the body would eventually begin to stink, and so they tied a rope to his leg, so if he didn't go in perfectly holy, and he falls down dead in the presence of God, they could drag his sad little body out of the Holy of Holies and then try again next year. That's meant to be funny. A little funny. A little sad, a little funny. Thank you, Jerry. One day a year, one man a year, for one moment, all year long. One person of the entire people of God gets to walk in and experience and enjoy the presence of God. No one else. Not his brother, not his friend, not his wife, not his kids, not his mama. Everyone else has to stand on the outside. But he gets to go in. And he can't bring anything back out with him. And that was their story. Once a year, one day a year, for a few moments a day, one guy gets to walk back into the presence of God, hoping that God doesn't strike him down because he sinned in between his cleansing and walking in. And then he walks back out. And they've got to wait 365 more days. But over and over again, the point of the Bible, the story of the Bible, is that God made us to dwell in his presence with him, and that we ran from his presence, but God has been pursuing us. But there's no way the fullness of God's plan was meant to be one man for one moment on one day once a year. No. If you read the end of the story, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will be their God and they will be his people. There was meant to be an intimacy between us, and you don't get intimacy behind a veil, despite what many Netflix love shows would try to tell us. I kind of love them. They're very funny to watch. Love is Blind. It's incredible to watch humans do really stupid things. But alas, I told you, pastors are sinners. So that's the high priest. They had to be holy. They had to come to the right heritage. And the most important thing they did was on the Day of Atonement, offering the sacrifice for the people, walking into their sin. Which brings me to my second question. Why is Jesus a better high priest? Well, he's better than all of them, but particularly according to our scripture, Jesus is better than Aaron. Verse 14 said, "Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. We have a great high priest, not just a high priest, not just another high priest, but he's called great. They're elevating his priesthood. We have a great high priest." And then skip down to chapter 5, verse 4, we see the author brings up the first high priest and sets the course to say that Jesus is better than all of them. In chapter 5, verse 4, it says, "And no one takes this honor for himself," talking about being the high priest, "but only when called by God, just as Aaron was." So Aaron was the high priest. Jesus is the great high priest. It was known as the Aaronic priesthood because Aaron was the first one and he set the tone and the standard for everyone that would follow him. If you were a high priest, you were known as one of Aaron's high priests. You were in his brotherhood. And the author of Hebrews is saying, no. There's Aaron and then there's Jesus, which is exactly what he's been doing every single week. You're going to get tired of this by the time we get through the book. There's this person that was great and incredible, but there's still sub-Jesus. Because Jesus is still better than even our best. And it says that he's even better than the best high priest. Why? Well, requirements and function. Requirements goes back to hereditary line and holiness. Hereditary meaning the line of Aaron. Aaron was the brother of Moses, and he was pivotal in the story of God in setting Israel free from slavery to the Egyptian. And every high priest after Aaron fell in his line and was of his family. But there's a problem. If you know the story of Jesus, Jesus ain't Aaron's great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson. Jesus is David's great-great-great-great-great-great, a few more greats, grandson. Jesus doesn't have the right line. Jesus is of the tribe of Judah as the promised king. Aaron's of the tribe of Levi as the family of the priesthood. So how can Jesus be better than Aaron? How can he be a high priest? Chapter 5, verse 1. For every high priest chosen from among men, is appointed to act on behalf of men in relation to God to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. Verse 4. And no one takes this honor for himself, but only when called by God. Just as Aaron was, so also Christ did not exalt himself to be made a high priest, but was appointed, chapter 5, verse 10, being designated by God a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. I told you we were going to jump and skip, but when you start putting the pieces together, you're like, oh, I see what they're doing. Jesus was chosen. The author's argument is that Jesus was appointed as a high priest. It didn't have to do with necessarily what line he came from. He had to be chosen by God and appointed by God. And he was appointed by God not after the priesthood of Aaron, but after the priesthood of a guy named Melchizedek. And we'll talk more about him next week, but two things. One, Jesus is a high priest because God chose Jesus to be the high priest, just like every other high priest had to be chosen by God through the Urim and the Thummim. They were chosen, and Jesus was chosen. Second, Jesus can be the high priest and not be of Aaron's line because Melchizedek is the very first person in the Bible to be called a high priest. And he started his own priesthood that predates Aaron. And Jesus was appointed to be a high priest after him. So Aaron is the new kid on the block. Melchizedek is the OG high priest. And God said, no, Aaron was temporary. What Jesus is stepping into was meant to be eternal. Now, cliffhanger, come back next week and we'll talk about Melchizedek, what his name means, where he came from, and why that is one of the greatest scarlet threads of the Bible leading to Jesus. I am excited, and you should be too. If you're not, sleep more. We'll get there. Jesus is a high priest because he was appointed by God in the order of Melchizedek, which predated and superseded the order of Aaron. Which brings us to the requirement of holiness. So we've got the hereditary thing. Okay, he's a high priest after a different order, but what about holiness? Every high priest in the order of Aaron was human, which meaning they were a sinner by nature and by choice. Every high priest after the order of Aaron, Aaron's kid, his grandkid, his kid, they were born with a bent towards sin. And then at some point they became a toddler and they chose to sin. And then they became a preschooler and they chose to sin. And then became an elementary school kid and they chose to sin. And then became a teenager and they definitely chose to sin. And then they became a 20-year-old and they knew what they were doing and they did it anyways. Every high priest was born by nature bent towards sin and then made a decision to sin because they were human, and every human since Adam and Eve has been born with a bent towards sin and chosen to sin. But Jesus was born of a virgin. Jesus was conceived by the Spirit of God. Jesus was born with a nature, with a spirit that wasn't bent towards sin, that was in line right with God. And so Jesus wasn't born by nature a sinner. Jesus was born by nature holy as God is holy. And then Jesus walked every moment of his life from toddler to teenager to 30-something years old, loving God and loving neighbor with everything he was and everything he had, every single time. And Jesus could do it because he wasn't bent from the beginning. So Jesus was holy as God calls us to be holy. Jesus was perfect and sinless and spotless. He fulfilled the requirements of holiness that none of us ever could. And then he was put in the order of Melchizedek that superseded the order of Aaron. Chapter 5, verse 3. Because of this, he's obligated to offer sacrifice for his own sins, just as he does for the sins of the people. Talking about every other high priest that isn't Jesus. They had to offer a sin for themselves to be forgiven of their sins, and then they could offer a sin for the people. So for that moment, they're sinless. They offer a sacrifice for the people before they do anything sinful, so that they could be holy before God, offering a sinful sacrifice for a sinful people, and then walk into God's presence. But Jesus never sinned. Chapter 4, verse 15, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Jesus never had to offer a sacrifice for himself. Jesus never had to say, I'm sorry. Jesus never had to say, Father, forgive me. He never messed up. And like, I know if we've been around church a while, like we know this, Jesus is perfect, we're not. Jesus never did anything that he had to be sorry for. And Jesus never did anything that he had to regret. Jesus never felt shame. Jesus never had to make up for some wrongdoing to then try to do the right thing, which is what the priest here is doing. He had to offer a sacrifice for his wrongs before he could offer a sacrifice for everybody else's. But Jesus got to skip step one because he was perfect, and then he offered his perfect life for many. He didn't use a bull, he didn't use a goat. He used his perfect, sinless, spotless, untarnished, perfect person to offer his blood for our life. Jesus superseded the hereditary requirements, and Jesus perfectly fulfilled the holy requirements. And then if you want to talk about function, as I've already showed my cards, he overly and abundantly fulfilled what the Day of Atonement was pointing to. If you've ever read the book of Leviticus and not fallen asleep and actually gotten through it, the Day of Atonement sits right in the middle of it because the entire sacrificial system was meant to build upon it and flow out from it. And Jesus finished the Day of Atonement through his life, through his death, which is why in John chapter 20, he can say, "It is finished." This is why Peter can say he died once for all. It's done. No more bulls, no more goats. We'll creep into that in Hebrews chapter 7. But he finished what the sacrificial system said had to be done by one man once a day, every year on repeat, again and again and again. But Jesus did it once for all, not just in terms of time, but for all who would put their faith in him through all time. He's a better high priest when it comes to requirements. He's a better high priest when it comes to function. And why does that matter? Presence. Presence. The priesthood was always tied to the presence of God. The high priest was the only one who was able to enter the presence of God, but only the high priest, only for a few moments, and he could never take anyone with him. But Jesus, the greater high priest, has not brought us into the presence of God, but has brought the presence of God to us. Jesus is the better high priest because he has drawn near to us. Point 2. Jesus has drawn near to us. Again, chapter 4, verse 14. Since then, we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession, chapter 5, verse 7. In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications, something a priest would do, pray for the people, with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered, and being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. That doesn't mean that Jesus was imperfect and he became perfect. It means that he fulfilled everything that he was meant to fulfill. Right? So you can be perfect and still fulfill what you were meant to do. That's what that's talking about there. Verse 10, being designated by God, a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Jesus has drawn near to us. It says that he has passed through the heavens. Right? Jesus was the Word was with God, and in the beginning was the Word, and without the Word was not anything made that was made. Jesus always has been, and he was always with God in the heavenly places. Jesus didn't just one day after his resurrection and ascension get into heaven. No, Jesus was in heaven, and he left the heavens and passed through the heavens and came and walked in the earth. I've been there. I've been on parts of the roads that go from Jerusalem to Jericho. That's the only road that goes from Jerusalem to Jericho. He walked there. He wept there. He slept there. He was here. He was a person. He was a little kid running around crying. He was a teenager that probably got tempted to get into problems, and somehow he never did. He grew up. He had people issues. People didn't like him. People made fun of him. He was a man. He got hungry. He got tired. He had brothers and sisters. He had a mom. He has a dad that we don't really know what happens to. I personally think he died early. But he comes to earth. He bridges the gap that our sin created us between ourselves and God. When I was a little kid and I put my faith in Jesus, our pastor set us down and he wanted to make sure that like I wasn't just doing it because like the other kids were doing it. And he did the whole chasm illustration. He's like, God's on this side, and he drew a cliff. But we're over on this side, and he drew us in another cliff, and he's like, sin that separates us, and then he drew a line. He's like, but Jesus, through the cross, spans the chasm. And as a 7-year-old, I was like, whoa. as a 30-something, I'm like, kind of cheesy, but he's not wrong. And I have definitely used it when talking to some middle schoolers. Jesus passed through the heavens to bridge the gap between God and humanity because sin created a chasm. And no amount of creature could span the gap between creature and creator. No bull, no lamb, no amount of them could ever get us back into the presence of God. That's why Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden. Then God put two angels with flaming swords in front of it to say, not back in. Not because he didn't want them in, but because he knew if they got in the wrong way, they would die. And so they had to wait. And they had to trust, or they had to have faith that God would be faithful to his promise. And it wasn't that man would work their way back into the garden, that man would work their way back into the presence of God, but that God would become flesh and walk back into humanity and dwell with them as one man in one place at one particular time. And the presence of God in the second person of the Trinity, Jesus, walked amongst people like you and me. And they didn't have showers or deodorant. And they were smelly and they were stinky. And if you read Mark, he gets made fun of because who was Jesus' daddy? They say it was Joseph, but we all know Mary was pregnant before that. He had to get up and he had to go to work. And I don't know if you know this. You think St. Louis is hot? Try the Middle East. It's not known for being temperate. But he moved towards us, and the presence of God was walking amongst God's people in the person of Jesus Christ. Why? To condemn us? To show us how much better he was than us? To show us how short we had fallen? No, just like read the Gospels. Jesus is like pretty stern with the religious leaders who think they've got it all together. But normal, everyday people and people who know that they need help, gentle and lowly. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 2, so that he can deal gently with the ignorant and the wayward, since he himself is beset with weakness. To be gentle with the ignorant and the wayward. Now, none of us like to be called ignorant and wayward, but that is what it is calling us. So he can be gentle with the ignorant, who those that don't know what they're not doing. You just don't know what you don't know. And you become really wise when you can accept that you don't know what you don't know. And what did Jesus say on the cross? Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Like they think they know what they're doing. They think they're doing the right thing. They think they're supporting the state and the people around them. They think that Jesus is this criminal, but they don't know. And I'm pretty sure if we'd admit it, we've all done something that we thought was the right thing to do, and then our spouse came along, mostly men, and our wife let us realize that what we thought was right was wrong. So he can be gentle to the ignorant, because you just don't know what you don't know. Sometimes we've been doing something wrong the wrong way for a long time, and we didn't even realize it. But Jesus came to be gentle to us in that moment, not to scold us and guilt us, but also to be gentle to the wayward. It says, to the wayward, he looked on them with compassion as sheep who have no shepherd. He didn't look around at those who are running off without God, being godless people, without God doing ungodly things as godless people do, and go, how dare you? What's wrong with you? I made you and sustained you and gave you everything, and this is what you do with it? Not once did that come out of Jesus' mouth. Matthew 11, it says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Not once does he look at the ignorant, not once does he look at the wayward and think, how dare you? Not once does he say, this is what you did with what I gave you. But he's full of compassion and kindness. And he's gentle with the ignorant and gentle with the wayward. because he didn't come to guilt them. He came full of grace and truth, that he might bring them back into the presence of God, where they might meet with the author of life and have life to the full. Jesus has drawn near to us. And because Jesus has drawn near to us, he drew near to bring the presence of God to us. See, the high priest went behind the veil, which is just a Bible word for curtain, this really thick piece of cloth that was hanging. And the high priest would open the curtain. He would walk into the other side. There'd be a table. The Ark of the Covenant would be there, embellished in all of its gold, and he would drop some blood on it. The presence of God was there, and then he would walk back out, and they would shut the curtain, because if the presence of God met the sinful people, they would all die. But when Jesus died in Matthew 27, verse 51, it says, "Behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from the top to the bottom," meaning it wasn't a human that tore it open because they couldn't reach the top. That the God that was behind it, that was in the heavens, tore it from top to bottom so that he could walk back out and be with his people. See, Jesus fulfilled the requirements. He superseded the requirements. And then he fulfilled the function, not so that he could go back into the presence of the Father, but so that he could bring the presence of the Father to us and adopt us as sons and daughters. Jesus has drawn near to us so that we can draw near to him. That's the whole point. Jesus is a better high priest, and he's drawn near to us so that we can draw near to God. Verse 16. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace and help in time of need. Just going to say it again because my Texan is rolling. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Let us draw near to God, not to find guilt, not to find shame, not to find how dare yous, not to find you better try harder and be better or you're going to get kicked out. To find mercy, to receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Jesus is the better high priest who drew near to us so that we can have confidence to draw near to God. When? Well, verse 15 tells us that we don't have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. The call to draw near to God isn't just, that's what you do in the mornings when you wake up and you pray. I think that's a good practice. I think it's helpful for your soul. But he's talking about drawing near to God when we feel tempted, when there's this thing inside of us that wants to stray. I remember it was 2015. I was working for the North American Mission Board, helping plant churches all over St. Louis. And it required a little bit of travel. Normally there were day trips, not a ton of overnights. But one time, my boss and I, we flew to Atlanta to home base, and it was a 3-day, 2-night trip. And normally, if they were day trips or even overnights, we just shared a hotel room because we were cheap, and we're both dudes. Like we don't really need our own room. Like we're gonna be okay. We're just gonna sleep here, and then we're gonna get back in the car and go. But when we went to home base, they put us up in our own hotel room. And I just had this inkling in my soul. Kelsey and I have been married for about 9 months. And leading up to it, I just started remembering pastors that I'd had, particularly the youth pastor that I'd had, and some influential ministry leaders throughout my time talk about pastors making really dumb decisions in hotel rooms. And I don't know why I was thinking about it, but I walk into the hotel room, and the door shuts, and hotel doors shut with a pretty particular slam, clunk. And all of a sudden, the thoughts begin to flood my mind of, what's on the TV, what's behind the computer. And I'm telling you this as someone that dragon was slain in my early 20s. Like I'm in my late 20s, I'm married, like I'm happily married. That's not my fight or my struggle. Like that thought doesn't enter my brain at that point in time. I'm still a dude, I still have fights. But not my fight. By the grace of God, not my fight. And so to walk into a hotel room and hear the door clang and feel like I can think of nothing other than that concept or idea terrified the bejesus out of me. Because one, my boss is in the room next door, and we're going to go to dinner in 2 hours, and I got to face him. And at that point, that boss was also my pastor. Little awkward. Second, I've been married like 9 months, and I'm really trying not to screw this whole marriage thing up. And I've read the articles and I've heard the stories. And I don't want to be another nameless pastor who did something stupid. And I don't know where this is coming from. This thought wasn't there the day before. It wasn't there the day before that. Wasn't there before that. It wasn't there like 30 minutes before. But the door goes clunk and boom, temptation hits. Now, temptation is not sin. Temptation is the temptation to sin. And so I'm sitting there going, okay, what do I do? Because I feel helpless and bombarded and I've got 2 hours. Okay, maybe I can go run. No. Because by the time I get changed and get running, this guy really likes me on time. So when he says 2 hours, he means an hour and a half. Like I don't have time to run and shower and get ready. Okay, God, just make this go away. Okay, really make it go away. Let me step over here. God, make it go away. Okay, let me get off the bed. God, make it go away. It's not working. It's like say, don't touch the red button, and the red button's just right there. And as I'm just going like, God, I don't know what to do. I don't want to do this. I don't know what to do. I don't want to do this. Like I leave the room, I go to the lobby and it's still bothering me. I'm like, God, would this just leave me alone, please? So I eventually go back to the room and I pull out my iPhone 3, vintage. And I just call Kelsey because that's all I can think about doing. I'm going, God, help me, God, help me, God, help me. And this thought just begins to the only second thought in my brain behind do something stupid is call your wife. And I'm saying, God, help me. And I don't feel like it's working. And the only other thing that's going into my brain is call your wife. So I call Kelsey and I tell her everything I've just told you. And she's like, okay, one, we've had this conversation. I know this isn't your fight. So I know something else is going on here. And I know you probably feel really ashamed to say something right now. She's like, and I'm not ashamed of you. I'm not disgusted by you. Because we've had this I know you. That's not your struggle at this point in your life. So what do you need? I just can't be alone. She's like, okay, I'll stay on the phone. So we FaceTime for the next hour. And she's doing studying for her OT board exam. And I'm doing email. It's not an exhilarating phone call. And she said, okay, it's time for you to go to dinner. Yes, Mom. And she's like, what are you going to do when you get back? I'm like, well, I'm going to go for the run when I get back. And at some point, I think I have to come in here and go to sleep. She's like, yeah, my phone's on if you need me. So I go to dinner, go in, I change clothes, I go for the run on the treadmill, which was the greatest treadmill run of my life. Treadmills are terrible. And then I go back to the room. Door clunks, same thing. So I just FaceTime Kelsey. And we're just on FaceTime for the next 3 hours like a couple of teenage love bugs. What are you doing? Nothing. What are you doing? Nothing. What are you doing? Nothing. What are you doing? No, you hang up. No, you hang up. No, you hang up. And eventually she doesn't hang up until I fall asleep, and then she hangs up and then she goes to sleep. And I can stand here and tell that story with a little bit of awkwardness and a lot of joy. Because as I was drawing near to God, it didn't feel like I was getting the window to jump out of. I was being led to call out for help in my time of need. And I called out to the one that I could receive mercy and find grace from. And he didn't just immediately make it go away, but he did say, go do this. He did offer me a way out. And oftentimes I bring that up because Oftentimes when we're tempted, it's not just like this magical eraser that makes the temptation go away. Like, God, help me get out of this. God, make this thing leave my body. And he doesn't always just take his Holy Spirit magical eraser and go, okay, quick, 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 all better. But when we do call out for help, we will find mercy and we will receive grace. And sometimes that's a scripture that just begins to go in our thoughts and we're just going to have to say it over and over and over and over and over and over again. That's called biblical meditation. Sometimes it's going to be a person and you're going to need to pick up the phone and go, this is the 911. Like, I need help because I don't want to do something stupid. And you have a choice. In your time of need, to run to the throne of grace with confidence, or just keep running down the path you're going and you know the consequence of where that's going to end. But Jesus is the better high priest, who's walked where you've walked, who's been through what you've been through, and understands your weakness because he took weakness onto himself. And he is the better high priest who died for your sin, past, present, and future. Sins that you haven't even committed yet, he's died for. So that he might be gentle with you. So that he might give you mercy and grace in your time of need. He's come near to us. So let's run to him. Jesus, thank you for this morning. Thank you that at your throne we can find grace upon grace upon grace. That we can find mercy for our failures, that we can find grace for our shortcomings. God, and I pray that we would just hold fast to you this morning. That we would even now just begin to call out and say, God, I can't do this. I need help here. I'm just going to lay this and trust this with you at your feet. And God, I pray that you'd speak. God, I pray that you would remind us of the words that you've inspired in your scriptures, God, that you would call to mind that person that loves you and loves us. It's going to help us guide us through this difficulty. God, I pray that this temptation that wants us to run from you wouldn't win this time, but we would see the trick, we would see the scheme, we would see the path diverging in the woods, and we wouldn't choose the one that leads to death, but we would choose the one that leads to you and leads to life. Because you've drawn near, would we draw near to you this morning, trusting that you are enough and sufficient, and that you're calling us to come to you to find grace and kindness. I pray that in Jesus' name.